My name is Gabriel Durham, and I'm very excited to be speaking at this conference virtually today. I was invited by some of my friends from the Woodenfish Foundation and some other scholars of mine to share some perspectives today from not only my connection to the Buddhist community and philosophy in general, but also my now decade of experience in the sustainability industry, where I've worked for the University of Houston, the city of Houston. I've also done research in Georgia about environmental triggers of health disparities and all these kinds of things. And the reason why I wanted to come and talk today is because after working in the sustainability industry for as long as I have, while meditating most of my life and studying Buddhist philosophy, I've realized that there's a lot of overlap between the two about escaping these cycles of rebirth and samsara and escaping our extractive, economic, dirty systems. And so I wanted to talk today about that overlap because I find it to be very constructive in giving people advice on how to move in this world that we find ourselves, how to do mindful activism and work. And in order to make that kind of digestible and approachable, I thought a good model would be to look at the Eightfold Path as a kind of parallel structure for the sustainability movement that we find ourselves in, with a particular focus on right livelihood, which I'll get to in the middle of this talk. So we only have 15-20 minutes together, so I guess I'm going to go ahead and jump right in and pepper in some of my sustainability experience while we work through this kind of talk today. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you can get something from this. So starting off with the Eightfold Path, which is pretty introductory for a lot of Buddhist folks. It's in kind of Buddhism 101 courses. It's one of the first things you'll find on Wikipedia if you look into Buddhist philosophy and teachings. This Eightfold Path is a set of pretty specific instructions from Buddhism on how to kind of cultivate the lifestyle that a Buddhist is after, how to work towards proper transcendence, and maybe even if we're lucky, enlightenment. A lot of these are in there. So it's not really a hierarchical system. It's not like it goes from right view progressively up to right jhana or right transcendence. But I'm going to present it that way today just because it fits well with the sustainability movement. But I hope you'll see that these all complement each other as they're supposed to. It's not kind of one before the other. They're all equally important. But today, I wanted to start with the first one in my list, which is right view. So right view is a really good place to start on this whole Dharma wheel because the right view is kind of when you start to say, hey, something is off here. So in sustainability, that's one thing, but in Buddhism, it's very specific. It talks about awareness of cause and effect. It talks about awareness of karma, the consequences of our actions, and essentially the moment when we start to look at the world as something that is workable and path walkable, as opposed to this completely stuck place we find ourselves in. So again, with Buddhism, that's when we start to say, hey, maybe I could get enlightened. Maybe I can see that there's something wrong here that can be improved upon or better understood. So in sustainability, I think this is kind of the beginning for a lot of people in that we look around at our economic systems and we see what's going on in the world. And all of a sudden we say, hey, there's something wrong here. And this pops up variously throughout history. You see monks and even lay people talking about this moment where they realize human beings are abusing their environment. There's something going on here, whether it's cyanide fishing or eroding the tops of mountains for mines. Throughout history, from the beginning of it, you can find people who say there's something about human behavior in our environment that is abusive and that if taken to a larger scale could become very dangerous, which is where we find ourselves now. So in sustainability, I kind of see this as the 1960s and 1970s when people were first starting to wake up as a global scale to plastic pollution and emissions from factories and these kinds of things. So in sustainability, this right view is, hey, these systems are really dirty and we invented them in the first place. So maybe we can start to change them. So that right view, I think, is a great place to start because that's where a lot of people already are at. We all know that there's work that needs to be done. So what comes next? The next thing I see is then the right resolve. And right resolve in Buddhism is usually a very renunciation-focusing aspect. I'm going to escape samsara, or I'm going to awaken in this lifetime. It has to do with the effort we put forth to our practice to know that this is going to take a lot of work, and we have the right mindset to know that this is something we have to do, we must do, and are prepared to do. So in sustainability, just think climate change targets. Just think about all of the different Paris Climate Accords that we've set where, okay, we've seen there's something wrong with these systems. We've seen how there's something that is wrong, but what actions do we set in motion to do? What is our goal here? What is our focus? And so for sustainability, we see this all the time in reduction goals, campaigns, all these things that say this is the kind of stuff we need to do to solve climate change. Let's all rally together and do it. And I think all of us have gotten that message fairly well as well. But that brings us into this whole right speech thing, which comes next. Because what is right speech? So in Buddhism, right speech is very specific. Again, you might notice a very interpersonal focus with this thing that we call right speech, right view. It's very inside of like who we are and how we're relating to the world. And the same is true with this right speech idea of no lying, no rude speech, no sowing discontent, talking about people when you know it's going to upset them. Very interpersonal focused. And again, the idea is to start looking at how you talk to people as an impact of your karma and your awareness and your cultivation of this whole path that we're trying to walk. So in sustainability, it's very similar, but it's again less interpersonal and more about the way that we're looking at how we're going to achieve these right conduct goals that we keep talking about and right effort goals that we keep talking about. So in right speech, a great example in sustainability is the word organic, right? What does organic even mean? Organic to a chemist means something very different than organic to a farmer. And getting that definition right is pivotal when you're talking about sustainability with people, because if you don't get it right, it can often cause a lot of nitpicking. Well, they say this and they really mean this. And look at these people who say they're setting climate goals, but they don't even know what organic really means. It's all organic, even oil's organic. So right speech is actually quite important in sustainability. And so I encourage you all to think about this part of it. How are you talking to people about it? Another example is global warming used to be a term that was thrown around a lot, but the world isn't just warming up, it's extreme weather, which is why we now call it climate change. So even though Buddhism, it's mostly about these things about no lying, no sowing discontent, if I was a sustainability monk, I would say things like no global warming, because that just sows discontent with the people who are here to be naysayers, and it causes further complication, which then complicates the next piece, which is right conduct. Again, in Buddhism, this is very specific. No killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct. Very focused on how your interpersonal world is and how that relates with others around you, with very clear instructions on how to cultivate the right conduct to get you into this place for good karma and transcendence and all that stuff. And again, very similar to sustainability, right? Because in sustainability, it's all about what are we doing with our stuff? How are we behaving in the world? How much are we driving? How much are we recycling? How do we garden? These kinds of things. Right conduct is pivotal in sustainability. And I think a lot of us have been doing very well in that. I've worked in sustainability so long, I've seen the transition from monoculture lawns to better pollinator gardens, right? That's right conduct. We're getting habitat provided. We're fighting soil erosion and these kinds of things. But it has a deeper, sinister thing here, and I'm going to linger for a second on right conduct, because for the last about 3 or 4 decades, right conduct has been sold to us as our problem, right? Think about the Crying Indian campaign that they had for Keep America Beautiful. They see the wrapper that goes out the window of the car, and there's this Indian who looks at the camera and he sheds a single tear to create this narrative that it's all our fault, that we have all this plastic everywhere, that we have all these papers everywhere. But fun fact, Keep America Beautiful, and that ad itself was paid for by the Coca-Cola Company and Frito-Lay. So that was the offsourcing of their bad conduct then onto us, saying we need to change, we as citizens need to do this. But if you look around, a lot of us are doing a really good job. We've cut our plastic bag use, we're using our single-use water bottles, and all these things. Our conduct is finally right, but it keeps on getting stuck somehow. We keep on finding that it's still, the trash still shows up, the soil is still being eroded. So what is going on here? And I think that's what brings me to my main point, which is this thing we call right livelihood. So, what is really livelihood? Livelihood is the way that we stay alive, right? Livelihood is how we pay the bills. Livelihood is how we keep the lights on. Livelihood is how we feed our children. A very integral part of what it means to be a human being, livelihood is. And in Buddhism, they acknowledge that, and knowing that if you had the wrong livelihood, it could be very difficult to find any type of transcendence or peace, because they say no trading of weapons. Because if you're generating violence in the world, how can you be a nonviolent person? No human trafficking, no selling of human bodies, no selling of drugs or intoxicants or things like that. Because if you've taken these, again, right conduct vows we've talked about before, that conduct starts to show up in your livelihood. But in the world we find ourselves today, that seems to be somewhat separate from us as far as our agency and our choice. So we find ourselves doing all the stuff at home. Let's imagine a perfect scenario. You've got a garden at home that you get all your vegetables from, and it's all with rainwater. And you've got all these wonderful pollinator beds all around, and you keep your thermostat minimally used. And then the minute you have to go to your livelihood, you got to get in a car, especially if you live in Houston like I do. And you have to drive and emit all these emissions. And then you get to the conference room with all the board members, and they all have to have a very specific coffee cup. And you have to make sure to order those coffee cups and print 100-page memos. And then you find out that your entire salary and a bunch of your company is invested in oil. And a lot of that money that's coming from them is their oil investments. And you find yourself saying, my goodness, I didn't make any of these choices, but this is my livelihood. And you have to ask the hard questions of how can I then change my livelihood to be more sustainable? In the same way these early Buddhists had to ask the question, how can I change my livelihood to be more of a Buddhist? It's very similar and also very, very difficult, because we're talking about life, bread, electricity, children, the things that we do to keep that all together. And what is industry right now but collective livelihood? And that collective livelihood is where all the red flags are being thrown out. You know, we talk about sustainability today, and we find out that 80% of all the global pollution is coming from the commercial sector, not from our individual homes. We find out most of the pollution and also the plastic is coming from that same place. Just look at COVID. When COVID hit, all of a sudden medicinal plastic had to be everywhere. All the zero waste eateries that you could go to all of a sudden had to use shrink-wrapped plastic utensils. All these choices that none of us made because of the collective livelihood and industry that is the medicine industry. So we seem as a culture and as a collective to be stuck at this idea. We've got the right speech. We know how to talk to our senators. We know how to say that climate change is real. We know how to conduct ourselves amongst ourselves with reusable water bottles and drainage gardens and all these things. But the moment we hit this thing that we're aspiring to called right livelihood, is where it all seems to shut down. And so another thing about that is that it comes up into right effort. And this is the next piece of the talk of how, okay, we've got this messed up livelihood. What efforts can we make to change that? Because if it's this collective thing, it's not a single person's decision, and it's not also the collective's decision. It's kind of a non-dual thing, which again is a very Buddhist idea. And so I think it's important to then start looking to the future. We've got still left to talk about today: right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi. And so these three pieces I see as the future of sustainability, and the places where we can really start to think about, okay, where can this livelihood thing that seems to be so dirty start to get cleaned up? So first example is our right effort. So in Buddhism, again, bringing it back to the historical context, it talks about restraint. It talks about meditation and sustaining practice. In short, it's not over until it's over. You can't just meditate at a retreat for a couple weeks and expect to be enlightened and keep going. There's a famous Zen saying of before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So before the Clean Air and Water Act, clean up the air and water. After the Clean Air and Water Act, clean up the air and water. Very similar. And a good historical example of that is, in fact, our Clean Air and Water Act, which was passed in the 1970s, believe it or not, by a Bush administration, which is pretty amazing to think about. And so I think it's important as a sustainability professional to shed a bit of light on that Clean Air and Water Act required that there was no idling of 18-wheeler trucks. In the 70s, it said that there was going to be no more idling. Have you ever seen that policed anywhere? No. I've actually had to write Clean Air and Water Acts for Houston and also for the university I worked for. And I was told specifically that I could write the policy, but it was unpoliceable. because of the amount of trucks all over. And because what are we going to do? We're going to go see somebody idling and wag our finger at them and yell at them. That's not right speech. So you see how these start to come together, because if I then go and decide to talk to this poor truck driver and wag my finger at him and make him feel so mad, that's not good conduct either. And it's going to cause him to be stressed out, me to be stressed out, both of us to be pretty upset with each other, and it sows discontent, just like right speech was talking about. So what is right effort in that scenario? Is it to go and talk to his supervisor? Is it to go and campaign in Washington to actually enforce this Air and Water Act that clearly they don't have the ability to do so? It's very confounding, but as a minimalist, and as we talk about skillful means in Buddhism as well, what if that truck idling didn't have an environmental footprint to begin with? That's a whole new idea. So now we're starting to show up with zero emission cars and different types of things like that that take away that human perspective, because guess what? Humans are humans. My anthropology degree helped me see that we've been humans forever. And it helps us think a little bit more skillfully with our means about where to apply our effort and our time to fight this climate crisis. And it's not just yelling at each other. It's about policy and innovation and helping each other through this more properly applied effort. So next is right mindfulness. And right mindfulness is a pretty fascinating one to think about from a sustainability perspective. In Buddhism, this talks a lot about right meditation. It talks about, not daydreaming and sleeping all the time on your cushion and calling it transcendence. It's proper middle way awareness, cultivation of single point focus. In other certain types of Buddhism, this is prajna that we're cultivating through right mindfulness, as opposed to, again, just kind of like we could do anywhere else. So what does that mean in sustainability? It's actually what I'm trying to illuminate today. It's the very thing I'm trying to illuminate with this talk. So right mindfulness is how we engage in our right livelihood. It's how we pick our battles. It's how we look at what we're doing and value what's good about it. For example, being unmindful would just be saying that, oh, it's all horrible because that's what I hear on the news all the time, and this is clearly what I'm being told, and it's not doing any good. But right mindfulness is going into my garden and seeing how much taller my native plants have gotten. It's going and seeing the water leave my garden clearer than other people's gardens, or the drainage to be better. It's to be aware that these things take time and these things are happening, especially on a local scale, and to then use that energy to take you a bit further, as opposed to just feeling like it's all stuck and you're in this bad position and you're just daydreaming through it all and you've surrendered to it. No, right mindfulness is knowing that this is something we're cultivating, and it's something that does have impact so long as you can have the clarity to see it. Which brings, of course, to the conclusion of this, which is right samadhi, or right transcendence, or right dhyana, depending on the type of Buddhism we're talking about. They slightly different languages call it slightly different things. I'd love to say that right samadhi in sustainability is like Star Trek, right? Because, oh yes, we've gone past all of these extractive systems and we still are people and we still have interpersonal conflict, but there's no more money and people can change livelihoods into good, wholesome livelihoods with skillful means and all that wonderful stuff. But that's too far in the future for today. So today, I think right samadhi, in the experience that we're going through right now, this transition that we're going through right now, is realizing that it's okay to rest. I call this radical rest. This came to me through Dzogchen perspectives and Zen perspectives, the kind that where you go and you're already complete. The idea is that there's nothing to do here. Because frankly, I have argued so much about conventional agriculture and organic agriculture, because that is a very important fight in sustainability. And you can have hour-long, day-long conversations about the benefits of both, believe it or not. Organic, as much as we love to think it's wonderful, is actually way more intensive on water and on land than conventional agriculture. So a lot of the deforestation going on around the world is because, I hate to say it, organic agriculture. And that's a challenge, right? Also, it uses way more water than conventional agriculture. Of course, we know the perils of conventional agriculture, from problems with our water tables to the animals themselves suffering quite a bit. So the way I sum it up is that organic agriculture is good for you, it's good for the animals, it's good for the plants, but it's not good for the planet. conventional agriculture, terrible for our water, terrible for the planet, terrible for the animals, but it's actually fairly good at conserving water and conserving land to protect natural spaces. So the wild planet is actually safer with conventional agriculture. It's enough to make you pull your hair out, because no one can ever be right about this argument. And that means that the right samadhi, to me, the transcendence, the ability to kind of nirvanize this whole argument, is that, you know what has the lowest carbon footprint of all? Meditation. And fasting, less. If you can have less agriculture in one way or the other, whether that's better self-control with your diet, or less wasted food, or any of these kinds of things, the answer is actually less, which to me is a great blessing of these teachings. So that's it for my 20 minutes. I hope that this wasn't too much information, but I'll be here for a panel at the end to discuss more of this and its relationship to my work in sustainability. So thank you so much for having me today, and I hope to see you more in the conference.